Hello, my name is Christina and welcome to my channel, Christina's Cleaning and Homemaking. If you haven't yet, I'd appreciate it if you click the subscribe button down below, and if you like this video, make sure to click the like button because that tells YouTube this is a good video and that other people might be interested in it as well. In this video, I have two major tasks going. One is making lemon squares and another is redoing this chair. I bought this chair as part of a desk and chair set to put my sewing machine on. I bought it used probably about 3 years ago. And it's a sturdy desk and the chair goes great with it, but the cushion has seen better days. So in this part of the video, I'm going to reupholster this chair so we have a real good functioning seat to sit on. Okay, the first step in the process is to take the wooden base of the seat off, and that requires a flathead screwdriver. So I'm gonna undo these screws here so I can take the base off and start working on putting the fabric on it. For the first step, I had to lay the chair on its side, and then I took a flathead screwdriver because the screws in this chair were flathead. They were in there actually pretty tight, so I had to be careful not to strip the screws, but I did manage to unscrew all four of the screws, and along the way I learned to not actually press the screwdriver into the screw, which is what I was doing to prevent it from stripping, because it actually made it tighter into the board. But as you can see here, I went around and screwed all four screws and was able to get the seat off the base. Now that the base is off, I can remove these staples that are holding the old fabric to the board, and then after that I'll start working on the foam and the new fabric. Now those staples that held the old fabric weren't coming out easy, but I also found that the fabric was really brittle, so it was easy enough to just go around and tear the fabric off, and then any of the staples that were loose, I could go ahead and take some of them out with the screwdriver. There were a few that I tried to get off with the pliers and they did come out later, but for the most part I just ended up ripping off the fabric and then pulling out what ones I could with the screwdriver in order to get the new fabric stapled onto the board. But yeah, just at this point it was easier to just rip the old fabric off, and then I put the board on top of the foam and lined it up so I knew where to trim off the foam that was in excess. And I wanted to find a marker, but I couldn't. But the pen did the job of at least marking the spots where it needed to be cut. So I marked on both sides where there were excess because there's a slight angle to the seat and the foam padding was square. Now to cut the foam, I used a serrated knife because all the tutorials I've seen said that's what worked best, which my knife was sharp enough, so I'm not sure how they made it look so easy. It was a bit of a task. As you can see here, I had to make a few attempts to get the knife to actually cut the foam, and it didn't really want to cut straight so much. Towards the end here, actually, of me cutting the foam, you'll see where it finally got a little bit easier and I was able to trim it up some, but it wasn't as clean of a cut as I would have liked to have had on the foam. But either way, the foam got cut on both sides and made it conform more to the shape of the wooden base. As you can see, at this point I switched from one side of the foam to the other side so that I can make both sides even. And I think this was actually the side where I started getting the hang of it more as far as cutting off the foam, but it was still a task. Now this is the point where I got the fabric out and I ended up laying it on the floor and then putting the cushion with the seat board on top of it, so that way I could get the seat cushion laid out in a way that I wanted it on the fabric. And I checked over the fabric to see if there was any specific part of the print that I really wanted on the seat cushion, but it's a nice print and there was really no bad spot or preferred spot. So I just sort of laid it out and then put the seat and the cushion over top of the fabric and fold the fabric over so I could get an idea of how much fabric I had and where I was going to need to staple it, and if there was a way I needed to arrange it just so that it looked, straight as opposed to cockeyed. This fabric actually is a really nice fabric. I picked it up at Joann's and I got a deal on it because it's the decorator fabric and it was $9.99, but it was on clearance for 80% off. And so that dropped it down to in the $2 range, and then there was a little over 1.5 yards. And since it was a nice fabric, I just decided to go ahead and take all of it, so that got me an extra 10% off. So the foam actually cost more than the fabric for this, which was kind of surprising. And so basically I'm just taking the fabric, folding it on each side, and stapling it down kind of in, but not too close to the edge. And I'm doing that because I noticed that where the screw holes were closer to the edge than I realized, and I wanted to make sure I didn't cover up the holes and staple over them. So I'm basically just pulling the fabric tight over each side and stapling the fabric, and then when I went to do the corners, at that point I realized I really did need to cut off the excess fabric, which I wanted to make sure I didn't do until I had the sides stapled, because there would be nothing like stapling part of it, cutting the fabric, and then falling short of fabric because I cut it too soon. So I waited till I had the sides at least stapled, and then I went around and cut the fabric, and I made sure I left enough so that at the corners I could pull the fabric tight and make the pleats. And despite the fact that overall the pleats seemed easy enough from what I'd seen in videos and conceptually they did, making them was a slightly different story. So as you can see here, I'm going over and adding more staples now that I've cut the fabric to catch any loose parts of the fabric and pull it tight. And then I'll go on to the corner pleats. So that involves taking the fabric from the very center of the corner and folding it over and stapling it. And then after that, you take the fabric from the right side and you pull it over to the left in order to make a pleat, and the fabric from the left over to the right. And the fabric became a little bit less cooperative to move once you stapled one side down. So there were a couple of corners I had to really work the fabric to get it to fold correctly and get it to pleat and lay right when I had the middle and the side already laid down and stapled. So this is the last corner on the cushion, and then once I got that corner down, I basically just went around and reinforced with staples anywhere that looked like it was a little bit slack and just needed tightened up and reinforced. So it was just basically going around the peripheral and making sure that there were enough staples in to hold the fabric. And then after that, I went around and cut any more of the excess fabric off to make sure that the holes for screwing the chair back in were exposed, because there's nothing like popping that base back on the chair, not being able to find the holes when you're trying to screw the screws back in. And I didn't want the fabric to get damaged by the screws if at all possible, because as tight as the fabric is pulled on the chair, I didn't want a chance, if there were holes put into the fabric, that the fabric would fray and come loose after a while. So that was kind of a concern of mine. So I just made sure to go around and trim the fabric up to make sure that all the holes to screw the base back into the seat were exposed. So now that I had the fabric and the foam all attached and stapled onto the base, I picked the chair up, and it seemed like the best way to reattach the base would be to put it cushion and base down on my crafting table first, then put the chair on top of that, and then put the screws in. So as you can see, I'm going around to each corner here and just reattaching the screws. The beautiful thing about it is that once I had one lined up and screwed in, it was easier to just sort of have the other ones scoot to where they needed to be. So it was only like minor adjusting that I needed to make sure things were lined up. And then after that, I just screwed all the screws in, and it was much easier actually putting the base back on than it was taking it off to begin with. And this is the finished product. Overall, I think it turned out really great. It sits well. My husband and I have both sat on the chair, and he likes how cushiony it is, and I look forward to when it gets mashed down a little bit more when I use it for my sewing table, but it turned out really nice. So now on to the next project. One thing that I love during the summer, but any time of the year really, is lemon bars. I think they're absolutely delicious. So the first thing to make lemon bars you start out with is making the crust. And so that takes 1 cup of flour, and then you have the powdered sugar and the butter. And the butter is it's a full stick of butter, which equals a half a cup. So first I did the flour, then I did the butter, and now I'm measuring out the powdered sugar. And I will put a link in the description box with the recipe. It's a Betty Crocker recipe. She has a few versions of the lemon bars, but I like the original one, so that's what I'm making here. So that was about a half a cup of the powdered sugar, I believe. And first I start out mashing it all together with the fork, and then once I have it mostly integrated in, but not to the consistency where it's like all really mixed together, I'll start using my hands to just really squish everything. The butter wasn't as melted as I thought it was, so that's why I really got into it with my hands. So first I broke everything down and tried to mix it in with the fork, and then after that I started digging in with my hands and making sure to really get everything mixed together and incorporated, because you don't want to have clumps of butter when you're trying to mash it down into the pan. So right now this stage is just pretty much mixing everything together and getting the butter to break down and getting everything to sort of come together so it becomes a good crust. At this point, I've transferred the entire mixture for the crust into the pan. So I used a glass casserole type dish like you use for brownies, and I poured the crust into there, and I just started mashing it around, making sure that I sort of got it firmly pressed in there and that all the corners were covered and that there was no spot that was really thicker than the other, just trying to make it even and press it down with my fingers. And the crust really does like to kind of stick to your hands, so I did have to scrape it off my hands a few times, but I usually like doing this part with the back of a spoon, but it was just more efficient this time to go ahead and press it down with my hands, especially since I'd already been mixing the crust together that way. And then I put the crust in the oven, and it cooks for 20 minutes, and it'll get nice and brown. And while the crust is in there is when I start working on the batter for the actual lemon part. So this starts out with the sugar, which I like an organic type of sugar that we have. And so it's a cup of sugar, so I was filling that up, and actually I had to refill the bottle because it ran out of sugar. So I refilled that and then went on with the 1 cup measurement for that. After I poured the sugar in, then comes the eggs. Now I used 2 eggs for this recipe, and I think one of them at least was a duck egg. I talked about it in my other cooking videos that we get eggs from someone local who has a bunch of ducks and chickens that she raises and sells the eggs. So it's basically farm fresh eggs, which are really nice. So I like to sort of wash the shells off a little bit, wipe them off real quick before I put them into the batter mixture. And now it's time for the lemon. So first thing I did was wash off the lemon, check to make sure it smelled good, and it smelled really good. And then I rolled in my hands to basically loosen up the lemon inside before I start scraping off the rind of the lemon. And that's a tool that I got from Pampered Chef probably about a decade ago. And I love it because it's so easy to just go around on the lemon and to grate off the rind of the lemon, so that way I have the lemon peel all, ground up and shaved off, and then can easily measure that into the mix. And then once I'm done with scraping off the lemon peel and getting that into the batter, the next part will be cutting the lemon in half and squeezing out the juice. And for this recipe, you use, I think it's more of the juice than the rind. So it's, I think, 2 teaspoons of rind, but it's 2 tablespoons of the juice. And so once I get done with scraping off all the rind on this, I'll measure that out and put that into the mix. And then I will cut the lemon in half and get the lemon juice out and put that in, because that's sort of a necessity to the whole sweet versus sour balance. And I really love how they complement each other, the sweet versus the sour in this. I also like using real lemon juice and using the peel from the lemon, because it just sort of adds to the flavor and the texture of the lemon squares. The next step is measuring out the baking powder to go into the recipe. And so I pull out my measuring spoons and do that one real quick. And then after the baking powder, I still need to do the salt. And with the salt, I usually just sort of eyeball that one, because I know roughly what 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt looks like. And so I just use it straight from the grinder as opposed to grinding it into a bowl and then measuring it. And so at this point, put up the eggs, grab the hand mixer, and I'm putting in the attachments for like whipping, so they'll make it a little bit fluffier. And I start out on the lowest speed and end up going to the highest speed to try and get the mixture as fluffy and whipped as possible, because I want it to be nice and mixed together and fluffy when I pour it into the pan with the crust already cooked, which it'll go pretty much straight from this bowl onto the hot crust and then go back into the oven. So I spend a good few minutes mixing it with the mixer, which obviously I cut that short here because I'm not going to torture you with 5 minutes straight of mixing. But there I popped the little attachment pieces out, and I'm scraping batter into the crust. And then once I get it all scraped in, I'll put that into the oven, and that'll go in. It can go in anywhere from, I think, 25 to 30 minutes, but this oven works really well, and I find that using the shortest amount of time actually works pretty good on it. So after about 20-25 minutes, the lemon bars are done. So at this point I've gotten them out, and I'm just going to sprinkle the powdered sugar on the top of them and then let them cool for a little bit, and then I'm going to get myself a piece, as you can see here in a moment. And as usual, they were so good. I love this recipe, and the lemon squares just turned out really great. So I thank you for watching my video, and if you haven't yet, please click subscribe down below and like this video, and I will see you in the next one.